And welcome back, everyone. This is the X Zone. I'm Rob McConnell, coming to you from our broadcast center and studios in St. Catharines, Ontario, Canada. If you'd like to send me an email, xzone@xzoneradiotv.com, on all social media sites, X Zone Radio TV. And if you'd like to watch the X Zone TV channel that is exclusive to Simul TV, visit www.simultv.com. X Zone Nation, we had Bart Sibrel on the show a number of weeks ago, and we were talking about the hoaxed lunar landing. We also were talking to Bart about a deathbed confession that he has, and Bart's done one heck of a job of trying to get the truth out there about the lunar landing hoax. He's been punched by astronauts. He's been kicked by astronauts. And it's not easy being a whistleblower. Now, joining me now is a gentleman who contacted us after Bart was on the show, and we decided to bring him on. So let's do that now. And welcome to the X Zone, Doctor. How are you today?
Oh, thank you for having me.
Now, I believe your name is pronounced Dr. Rasaviharii. Is that it? Rasaviharii?
So this in Rasaviharii, but you can just call me Rasa for short.
All right, Rasa. Thanks very much for contacting us and for coming on the show.
Thank you.
Tell us a little bit about yourself, Rasa.
All right. So maybe it would be easier if I tell my story from the beginning.
Okay, please.
And it's not going to be easy. A lot of people are not going to want to hear all this. But anyway, I just have to tell it, if that's okay with you.
It's fine with me, sir.
All right. So let me see. So I was a physicist. I was studying astrophysics in Portland, Oregon. And I graduated. And that was 1999. And they had, they send the scouts, university scouts coming to my university. And they tried to scout me and invite me to some larger universities to finish my PhD. But I wanted to leave the country. I wasn't interested. And I was even offered a job at NASA. One of the scouts said, "Oh, I can get you a job at NASA." I said, no, I'm not interested. But anyway, that's my background. I was in the physics and the astrophysics. So anyway, I left America in 1999. I left America. And I was living in India. And I came back to America in the year 2001. And, I happened to be in New York City when 9/11 happened. Whoa. And right after that, I started searching YouTube and things like that. And eventually I ran into Bart Sibrel's video. And that was in 2001. And then me being a scientist, I was very skeptical about that. Wait a minute, that's kind of going a bit far that they faked the moon landing. So it was hard for me to accept that. But then I was going to fly back to India. And I went to the JFK airport to get on a plane to go to India. And at the JFK airport, they had a life-size picture of the man on the moon. You can stand next to him and take a photo next to him. And when you see the image that blown up, that high res, you can see that the pixelation, with the background image, there's a mountain and then there's the ground he's standing on. And there's a change in the pixelation. So that means the mountains were not part of the picture. And so I became convinced then. I was like, no, this is definitely. And so I've been researching this since 2001. And also another story is I also came back to America in 2003. And in 2003, I met a friend of mine, and I asked them, I said, "What is your job?" And they actually working for NASA. So I asked them, I said, "Okay, what do you think about this moon landing thing?" They said, "Yeah, I don't think it was real." And this was a NASA employee. So she doesn't want me to say her name, but I have, I seek privately discussing with this NASA employee about the big question is, how did they pull it off? How did they fake it? Because there's so much scientific evidence that it was real. So how did they able to fool, millions of scientists all over the world? They did a really good job. So we're digging through and analyzing all this scientific data. And I have a friend in NASA, and whenever I find what I call smoking gun, I write her and say, "Oh, I found a new smoking gun," and we discuss it, So then that was 2003. I met my NASA employee friend. And also, let's say, to make a long story short, I'm trying to, I was...
Take your time, Russ. Just take your time. Don't worry about it.
Okay. So as I mentioned, I was in New York City in the 2001, and I started wondering, well, why did this 9/11 thing happen? And after many years of research, I basically came to the conclusion that the reason is because America is controlled by a private central bank. Okay.
Okay.
And so then I started wondering, well, are there any countries left which don't have a private central bank? So eventually I decided to settle down in China. And so this is, a lot of people don't know this, but China does not have a private central bank. They ended their private central bank in 1949. And if you don't believe me, I can show you evidence of this. But, a lot of people don't want to hear this. So anyway, let me just continue. So I moved to China, and the other reason I moved to China is because I was working in the field of free energy. Okay, I don't know if you mentioned, I mentioned this, but my university in America was Portland State University, and that was the university where they did the cold fusion experiments. So I had been exposed to this so-called free energy thing long time ago, back in 1999. And so I've been doing research. What is this free energy thing? And I traveled around the world. I met so many inventors that had so many machines, and I can talk about the suppression of that technology because it is real. I know people who have had their machines taken away, and even I know some people were killed and bank accounts seized. I've been around these people for a long time. So eventually I decided that if this free energy thing is going to happen, it's going to happen in China, because China does not have a private central bank. So anyway, that I made that prediction that if this is going to happen, it's going to happen first in China. Mm-hmm. And that prediction came true in the year 2019. So again, most people don't know this, but I moved to China, and I started working as a scientist. I met some government people, and I told them about this free energy thing. That was back in 2008, actually. And then then a very interesting thing happened was in 2015, I met another group of Chinese scientists, the top university. We call this the MIT of China. It's called the Tsinghua University. So they actually had built a machine. These scientists had built a machine, and they couldn't understand how it was working. It was defying the second law of thermodynamics. Okay, more energy was coming out than going in. And these scientists at this MIT of China were sitting around scratching their heads saying, we can't figure out how this machine works. So actually I met them in 2015, and I wrote down the physics of it, because one of my majors in university was quantum mechanics. So I wrote down some quantum mechanical equations to explain how this machine is working. And at that time in 2015, the machine was only halfway finished. And then I started guiding them, and we finally finished that machine in 2019. And we made our first power station. So we made a 10 megawatt power station which is running around the clock 24 hours a day, no fuel, no sun, no wind, nothing. It's just it's a quantum mechanical phenomenon that we have managed to capture. So that is my specialty, you know. But so a little bit in the year 2016, I met the people at the Chinese Space Agency, okay? And they offered me a job. At the time, I said no. I wasn't interested in working for the space because I wasn't so interested in space. You know, for me, space is a waste of money. You know, we could use that money for other things here on Earth, right?
I agree.
So
I agree.
So anyway, I turned them down in 2015, but I met them and I went to their, you know, the headquarters, and I said, obviously you guys know that no human being has been on the moon, right? And they said, of course we know that. Okay, this is the Chinese Space Agency, so of course we know that. So then I said, well, how do you know that? They said, NASA told us in 1980. So what happened was they made a deal with NASA in 1980, because 1980 was the year that China joined the UN Space Association. UNOSA, I think is the pronunciation, UNOOSA. China joined the UN Space Agency in 1980. And the NASA started helping China. We got our first rocket up, and then our first people in orbit, and all of that was because of NASA's help, okay? And so that was the deal. NASA said, we are going to help you with your space program as long as you don't blow the whistle on the Apollo missions. All right, so that deal has been going on. So, you know, people ask, why doesn't China blow the whistle? It's because we're getting technical assistance from China, from NASA. And so then also I was talking to them and said, you know, they said, we also have proof of that. You know, we have photographed the Apollo landing sites, you know, and I was like, oh really, can I get a copy of those photos? And they said, no, we're not going to let you have those photos, because that would essentially be, if you were to leak those photos, that would essentially be like starting a World War III or something. You know, that America would be very, very angry with that, you know.
But tell me at this point, Rasa, did you see the photos?
Yeah. I saw that. I mean, they, you know, at that time, that was 2016 when I saw, at that time, we had very low resolution photos. Right. But since then, we have a much higher resolution photos. So let me kind of wind up my story here. Is that last year, 2021, I accepted the job to work with the Chinese space program. And the reason I accepted the job is because, well, there's two reasons for that. Number one is, I don't know if you've read Bart Sibrel's book, but I've been talking to him a lot in private. Maybe this is not in his book, but he after, you know, this video he did, Astronauts Gone Wild, right? Yeah. And in that video, he interviews the astronauts, but that's not the end of the story. Okay, after that movie was finished, he kept on contacting these astronauts, and one of them, he appealed to their Christian nature and said, I think you should probably admit this thing before you pass away. And some point in these conversations, one of these astronauts mentioned to him, said, actually at NASA, we have plans to admit that. Okay, so Bart told me this story that NASA has plans to admit it. And so then I started asking around. The first thing I asked is my NASA friend. I said, what do you mean NASA has plans to admit they faked it? And then my NASA friend is not able to dig around inside NASA because she could lose her job. are we have plans? She can't mention the fact that the moon landings were fake at work, okay?
Right.
But I started inquiring in the Chinese Space Agency, and I said, what is this? NASA has plans to admit it. They said, yes, definitely. The plans are, as soon as Artemis lands a man on the moon for real, NASA is going to admit to the whole world that was the first time human beings have been on the moon. So for me, I tried to wake people up, and I, have a Facebook group, and I try to educate people. What are the smoking guns? How can we prove to people that this really was a hoax? But for me, it's not a big deal because it's only a matter of time before NASA admits it anyway. So I know this as a fact. So what happened was in 2021, I started talking to these Chinese Space Agency people again, and I said, what work do you want me to do for you? And they said, we want you to research the solutions which NASA has come up with for how to protect astronauts from the radiation. Okay? So that's my job now at the Chinese Space Agency, is I am just reading through NASA documents and I'm just translating them from English to Chinese. Okay? That's all I am. I'm just a translator and a researcher. Because I have a scientific background, I understand, the science of of space radiation and how to protect astronauts from space radiation. And the second reason why I accepted the job is because in that research, I found that NASA has some breakthrough technologies which actually can protect astronauts from the radiation now. So that gave me a lot of hope. Okay, the reason it gave me a lot of hope is because that means that this moon landing hoax is coming to an end soon. The sooner NASA can get a man on the moon, the sooner they will admit this thing, and I don't have to deal with the, trolls and people criticizing me all the time, calling me a lunatic for saying the moon landings are a hoax, So I want this thing to end, and I'm trying to help actually to make this thing happen as soon as possible. So that's
one of the points in A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Moon was the question of the Van Allen belts and the radiation that they posed, the danger that the radiation posed to the astronauts. And then Bart also in the film pointed to the Skylab of the International Space Center, as well as other manned flights, that they stayed safely below the radiation belts. How come no other scientist or group of scientists have caught on to this?
Okay, let me answer this question because this is a very confusing subject.
Okay.
So first of all, the problem is not necessarily the Van Allen belt. Okay, this is a big misconception among moon landing researchers. The problem is the radiation beyond the Van Allen belt. Okay. The Van Allen belts are what protects the Earth from the radiation which is out there. Okay,
right.
So there's two things that protect the Earth. One is the Van Allen belts. Two is our Earth's atmosphere. Okay, so when radiation is coming towards Earth, the magnetic fields that make the radiation curve away. Okay. The radiation coming in the Van Allen belts is created by the magnetic fields, and those magnetic fields throw the radiation away. So that's our first layer of protection from the deep, deadly radiation of deep space, okay? The second layer is those particles which do get through the Van Allen belts, they hit the Earth's atmosphere and they start to break apart, okay? So there's three layers of radiation exposure. One is on Earth, where we are protected by the atmosphere and we're protected by the Van Allen belts. Two is on the space station. So in the space station, there's no protection from the atmosphere, but they are still protected by the Van Allen belts. And then number three is beyond the Van Allen belts, where you have no protection, okay? So then you need a very special technology to stop that radiation, okay? So that's a very simple answer, and I'm trying to clarify because this is a lot of misconception about the Van Allen belts.
Why? I'm trying to imagine the effect of NASA admitting that all those years ago they lied to the American public. Not only did NASA lie, but every level of government. How are they? What do you think is going to happen when this disclosure comes forth that, oh, you know what? We never went to the moon until now.
All right, so let me answer that. So actually, they have already started preparing people's mind. So there's a movie. What is the movie where he goes to space? Interstellar, yeah. And so in that movie, he goes to his child's school, and then the principal says, "Your child brought this book to school. It's an old NASA book, and that NASA book say that they landed on the moon." And then the principal said, but we don't allow those books in school anymore because we replaced it with new books, and those new books say that the reason we faked the moon landing was to beat the Russians in the Cold War. So this come out in the movie Interstellar, and they're kind of preparing people's minds already, because this is the excuse that they're going to give. We had to fake it in order to beat the Russians in the Cold War. Now, this is actually just replacing one lie with another lie. It had nothing to do with the Cold War. But the reason I'm telling you that is because they're already getting ready people's minds for that. And so the other thing I wanted to mention is, okay, the US government already admitted that the Gulf of Tonkin was a hoax. Okay, they admitted, they said, you can read it on Wikipedia. It says, oh, well, there was 2 attacks, and one of the attacks, there might have been some ships in the area, but in the second attack, there wasn't any ships anywhere nearby. So they basically admitted already that the Gulf of Tonkin was a hoax. And what did the people do? Nothing. People don't, it's like, okay, we lied to you, but what did the people do about this thing? Nothing. So I don't think that it's going to have much of a repercussion. I mean, there's going to be a lot of people who feel really stupid, because they're like, I've been battling against these moon landing hoax deniers for so many years, and they were right all along. So that's going to be the main repercussion. But, they're going to... Go ahead.
I think the difference between the Vietnam War and the landing on the moon, because not only did, if this really is a hoax, not only did it take in the entire U.S. citizenry, but it also took in the people of the world. And I don't think that I think that there's going to be hell to pay if they do this.
Hell from who?
The people, because the people,
that,
especially in today's political atmosphere.
Well, I hope you're right. Bart also is very much into that. Like, oh yeah, once this thing gets exposed, the people are going to rebel or something.
Yeah, I think they are.
I hope so. I hope you're right. I'm a little bit pessimistic regarding that, but I certainly have a lot of optimism that this world is going to change, and maybe the moon landing will be the catalyst for that.
All right, stand by, Rasa. You and I have to take a short break. We'll be right back in Exo Nation. More of this fascinating topic. You heard it here. China knew from NASA that the Americans never landed humans on the moon. We'll be back. Don't go away. Exo Nation, Dr. Russ is with us. And Russell, when do you think that this disclosure will be made?
Okay, so as I mentioned, the reason why I took up the job with the Chinese Space Agency is because I was doing research on the radiation protection technology. And at that time, so this was last year in 2021. So what happened is at the beginning of 2021, NASA was a little bit unsure. So they were pushing back the date of Artemis 2. First they said, well, it might be 2005, it might be 2006. But then in last year, they made a big breakthrough in the radiation technology. And so then they decided, we're not going to push it back, we're going to stick it to 2024. And so I felt, wow, NASA is really confident that Artemis 2 is going to circle the moon with human beings on board in 2024. And since NASA was confident about it, then I said, maybe this thing is going to happen, okay? Because before that, they kept pushing the date back. But now they're sticking to 2024. So it's possible, it is possible, they have the technology now to circle the moon in 2024 and maybe even land a man in 2025, 2026. So that's what I'm saying. You know, if that happens, that will be the day that they admit it.
But what about the photographs that astronomers and amateur astronomers have taken of the area where the moon landings have occurred? And they also say, and they've got photos that, yes, indeed, there's parts of the lunar landing LEM still on the moon. You can see the craters. How do we explain that? Is this all part of the hoax?
So first of all, an Earth-bound telescope cannot see anything on the moon. NASA will admit that, okay? And also the Hubble cannot see anything on the moon. You can go to NASA's webpage, it's called Hubble Shoots the Moon, and Hubble cannot see anything there. But that's because the resolution power is not enough. The only thing which can photograph the surface of the moon that close is a ship which is orbiting the moon. Okay, so the only thing which has ever photographed the Apollo missions is called the LRO, and the Lunar Orbit Reconnaissance Orbiter. So that one, NASA has given, what was it, 2002, right? 2002 was when they released the first images of the so-called landing sites. Okay, so they're pretty bad images. They're pretty photoshopped and they look pretty bad. And as I mentioned, you know, here in China, we also photographed the landing sites. So what they did was they sent unmanned crafts to the moon. So what you see there at the landing site, this is where the unmanned crafts landed. And then they brought rocks back, because in order to fool the public, they had to have real moon rocks. So they did send unmanned crafts, and they landed at the Apollo landing sites. But the thing is, if you actually look at the photographs of the real landing sites, then there's no footprints there. Okay, it was just an unmanned craft that landed, scooped up some rocks, and came back. Okay.
How could a deception of this magnitude happen with nobody catching on?
Well, there has been some whistleblowers inside of NASA. There's at least 4 of them. But let me say that this is a very good question, because, you know, there are many people in NASA who know it was a hoax, and they're not talking. And why are they not talking? And not only NASA, but the European Space Agency, okay, and Russia as well. So why are they not talking? The reason is because of this. They know, you know, like in particular, those astronauts, NASA scientists who are working in the field of radiation protection. That's their job. They know that, you know, they're working out ways to protect astronauts from radiation, and the excuse that they're making now, this time we need radiation protection because we're trying to go to Mars, right? This is the excuse that they're feeding everybody. But people who are scientists like me know that the same protection is needed to go to Mars as it is to go to the moon. You cannot go to the moon with the Apollo. Apollo had no protection at all. Okay, so we've been working on this real radiation protection, and so there's many people who know that no human being has ever been beyond low Earth orbit. But why aren't they talking? The reason they're not talking is because they know that NASA has these plans to admit it. Okay, let's hurry up and get a man to the moon, and then we can admit it and just move on, and then just continue making progress, eventually send a man to the Mars or whatever, you know. So that's why they're not talking. They believe that in NASA, they believe it's a great cause, and they agree that, okay, let's just kind of continue lying for now, but soon enough, we'll admit it, and then we can move on.
But if this is a great cause because they're lying and they're admitting they were lying and they are lying, this will devastate any public trust.
Well, for most
They'll
of
lose
those,
their fund.
maybe, yeah. The thing is that the other thing is this, as I mentioned. As in the movie Interstellar, they said the reason we had to fake it was because of the Cold War. This is totally not true, okay? The Russians knew all along. They knew it because America was helping Russia. So anyway, a majority of the people are going to buy that. Yes, okay, we did it to beat the Russians. And especially now, since, there's so much tensions going on with Russia, okay, right. Russia's the bad guys again, So... but yeah, that's not, for those people who, it's like, okay, those people working at NASA now, they're not necessarily lying. They're saying the reason we need protection now is because this time we're going to go to Mars. Well, that's kind of true, actually. It's not 100% a lie. Definitely you need better protection to go to Mars. But right. the theory that you didn't need protection to go to the moon in the Apollo era is a total nonsense. That would be a lie. But that's not what most of them are saying now. They're just saying, oh, we need better protection because we're trying to go to Mars, or we're trying to make a colony on the moon or something like that.
Have other countries already been to the moon as well? Landed humans on the moon?
No, humans. No, not humans. We've sent unmanned crafts, many times. China just brought back our rocks, last year.
Right. So why does NASA have to go to the moon now?
Well, the reason that, I hate to sound like a NASA defender here, but, for the reason why NASA gets so much money is because that it gives hope to the children, oh, we want our children to grow up with dreaming of being an astronaut. So this is why NASA gets, 30 billion a year, I think they're getting. So it's like, because it gives hope to the children. Oh, we need America to be great and our children to have hope and to want to grow up to be scientists,
Mm-hmm. Why are you whistleblowing this story?
Well, I guess, as Bart mentioned, once people hear about this, they're going to start wondering other things. What else did the government lie about? So, for me, I obviously knew about 9/11 before I knew about the moon landing hoax. But, anyway, some people... Right now, Artemis is going on, and they keep delaying it, right? And they say, we're putting these dummies inside of the ship so they can have sensors for the radiation. And people are starting to wonder, like, why do we need radiation detectors now when we didn't need that back in the Apollo days, right? So people are starting to wonder about this. Why are we doing so much extra work now to get a simple man to the moon? So more and more people are waking up about this thing. And Bart, one other interesting thing Bart says, he calls it a soft conspiracy. It means, people weren't killed, like 9/11 or something like that. So
No, wait a minute,
easy.
wait a minute, wait a minute, wait a minute, wait a minute. There were 3 astronauts who lost their lives.
Yeah, that
So
may
three
be.
astronauts, so 3 astronauts did die. We can't say nobody was killed.
Yeah, not only 3 astronauts, also there was that other whistleblower guy, and his car was hit by a train. What was his name? It was Thomas Ronald Barron. He was a NASA employee who was inspecting the crafts, and he said the crafts are not suitable. And then his car was hit by a train. But this is a very, okay, 4 people is a relatively small number, and
I don't know about that.
yeah, I mean, I'm not justifying it. It's certainly, but I'm just saying it's going to be easier for people's mind to accept that, that kind of conspiracy rather than, one where it's just terrible, where they're killing, a million, you know.
All right, stand by. I've got to take my final break. We'll be back on the other side of this very short break as we wrap up this hour, all about the lunar landing conspiracy hoax, whistleblowing, coming soon to a theater near you. I'll be back on the other side of this break. Don't go away.